Hello, yes, a good morning, a good afternoon, or a good evening to you, however you may be listening and wherever you may be listening. This is the latest edition of the Baldwin Sports Media NFL podcast coming to you after what was, once again, as always, I like to say it every week, but this week it was definitely true, a very, very interesting week in the National Football League, the end of week 10. We are past the halfway mark, officially. Well, depending on how you do the maths, we've either passed it at the end of week 9 or we were at the midpoint at week 9. I don't know. I don't know exactly how the maths works, but we're definitely past the halfway mark now. And yeah, as always, there's always plenty to talk about, and we will get into that in a minute. But before we do, I need to do the admin for the show, which is as simple as, as always, thanking you very much for joining us. Don't forget, if you are new, you can like, subscribe, leave a bell. Not leave a bell, hit the bell icon on our YouTube channel to follow us. And don't forget to follow us on our other social medias. We are at Baldwin Sports Media on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok. And we are at MRB Sports Media on Twitter. So feel free to give us the respective follows or likes over there. And if you are a returning listener, then as always, thank you so much for making me a part of your week. Now, we do need to start, and we will start off, but obviously, I do need to start off on a rather sad note because, as I'm sure you're aware, we had two deaths within the NFL family over the course of the past week since we recorded. The first one of Dallas Cowboys player Marshawn Nealand, obviously a very young player. I won't get into the circumstances with which it happened, but obviously a very, very tragic situation there. Someone who never had the chance to create a legacy in the NFL at such a young age. But also, we had the death of former NFL Commissioner Paul Tagliabue. His legacy was already written. He had profound impact on the NFL. Many people would argue, but I think his biggest impact was eventually setting the stage for NFL games in the international series with his work with NFL Europe, which obviously laid the groundwork for the international series further along the line. So obviously two very tragic deaths within the NFL family over the course of this week, and there's no real way to make a segue or into the rest of the show, but I do just want to acknowledge that before we begin the program. And really, there's only one place to start, and that is with the New York Giants and their decision to fire Brian Daboll. Now, I've sort of gone back and forth over the New York Giants pretty much since the start of the season about where I think Brian Daboll in his future is likely going to be. I figured that if he struggled, then they were going to move on from him just because of the situation with Jackson Dart. Brian Daboll was the offensive coordinator for Josh Allen. So if anyone, or at least, during his formative years, if anyone was going to be able to turn Jackson Dart into a great player within the NFL, then Brian Daboll was certainly, maybe not number one, but certainly very high on the list of people that you think would do that. Now, the Giants obviously had their struggles at the start of the year with Russell Wilson as their starter. Then they went to Jackson Dart, and right out of the gate, it looked as if Jackson Dart was actually pretty promising coming out of the gate. The results may not have been there, but the performances certainly were. And, as I said, I figured that Jackson Dart was going to be playing or was playing at a level that could keep Brian Daboll his job. Because there was no way that the New York Giants were going to do anything this year. Obviously, in a rebuilding year, you look at the division they're in, it was going to take a while for them to get back to things. But if Jackson Dart was playing well, then that could at least buy Brian Daboll some time for them to say, or for him to say, look, we may not be getting the result, but look at what Jackson Dart is doing. He is the future of this franchise. Give me some more time. I think the only way that he may have, again, at the start of the season, thought that unless it was a disastrous, 1-16, 2-15 campaign, that they would, if Jackson Dart was again showing these signs of promise, that they would keep him. But obviously, results were not in his favour, and most notably, this past weekend against the Chicago Bears. I don't want to rip on the Chicago Bears, but they are not the best team. They are doing quite well, but they have also had their struggles this season. So maybe that was the thinking by the New York Giants just to say, hey, if you can't hold on against Chicago Bears, given the circumstances, then maybe regardless of who is quarterback, I don't think you are going to be, Brian Daboll is going to be the right head coach for this team. Now, despite all of that, I do still think that the Giants made a mistake in firing Brian Daboll. Now, I can understand their reasoning, given what I just laid out, but I do still think it is wrong. I think the Daboll should at least have had until the end of the season. Again, just to not necessarily turn things around. They're not making a push for the playoffs. That's not going to happen. I don't see a late season resurgence in their future. But I think he should have at least had a chance to pick up some wins, and then maybe again just to show that, hey, we have a good team here. We have the potential of a good team. I talked about that backfield a couple of episodes ago. Jackson Dart and Cam Scalaboo could very well be two franchise players for you. A brilliant quarterback and a brilliant running back. That can be the foundation of a very good team. Wide receiver. Malik Neighbors, when he comes back from his ACL injury, next season, that I do think there are a lot of good foundational pieces for the New York Giants to prove that they can do something. But obviously, the New York Giants just felt differently. So I can understand why they would have done it, but I think the timing of it was not the best decision for the New York Giants to make. Now, again, what this does moving forward, I've already seen some reports. I can't remember who it was from. I think it was from The Athletic, suggesting or hinting that the New York Giants would go and trade for Mike Tomlin to be the solution. I don't see that happening in a million years for a million different reasons. But they are going to need to go out and make a pretty big swing when it comes to this now. Who's going to be available at the end of the year? I think there may be some people who would think Mike McDaniel with Miami, because as I've said, I do think he's on the way out in South Beach. I can possibly see them turning to him to try and be the next one, try and revolutionize the offense the way he, almost, or at least had the potential to do in Miami. I think that could be the way they're going to go. I wouldn't agree with it because I don't think Mike McDaniel is head coach material, but that is certainly the kind of vibe that I could see them going with. But either way, it is going to be very, very interesting to see how they handle that approach in the off season. Now, in the second topic, a bit like last week, I want to focus on one of the big controversial calls that happened over the weekend. Although it wasn't the weekend, it was Monday night. It once again concerns the tush push. And yeah, I've made my thoughts very clear on the tush push in the past. I've always said that it is a legitimate play. However, maybe I just wasn't paying as close attention to it for whatever reason, or maybe just the talk around it was always big but not too big. I didn't pay enough attention to focus on the real aspect of it. And again, the discourse around it has changed this season because everyone went from, it's an ugly play or, it's unfair or all the stuff. When the talk became about not being able to officiate it, then the discourse really changed. And you saw it in plain sight on Monday Night Football against the Green Bay Packers. Again, it's been happening every week, but when it is a Monday night, standalone primetime game against a big opponent like the Green Bay Packers, it's not tucked away in the 1 o'clock Sunday window. It's always slightly different whenever it's there, but when it's primetime, there's more cameras. Everything about it becomes a lot clearer, and it's all talked about. And it's, again, especially the extra discourse around it heading into the game, because it was the Green Bay Packers who led the discussion at the competition committee to try and ban the play, during the off season. So again, a lot of talk around it. So there's always going to be a lot of focus and a lot of emphasis on it from the broadcasters, and ESPN, had an excellent camera angle. Again, every other TV show or TV network has probably already had this, but there was just something about it being in Monday night in prime time. The false start that goes on around it and around the tush push. Again, could not have been more clearer in this situation. they only attempted it once, but the one time they did it, and again, all the problems were there to see it. At least, again, as I say, the problems in officiating. I don't think you can ban it on aesthetics or injury because the data just isn't there for the injury. And as I've said, you can't complain about the ugliness. It is what football was back in the 1920s, and also I don't care about ugliness. Just give me the results. But when it was so egregious like that, I think even people without the instant replay could have seen it. But when ESPN do the slow mo down the line that you can see, it was pretty obvious what was going on. And I want to bring up a point that Albert Breer, a noted NFL insider, brought up, and he said, "Is this not something that replay assist or the expedited review, to give it its proper term, is that not something that should be brought in for? It is a play that the referees have missed. Why not go back and check? They checked it on. I think they did check it on something else during that game where a play happened. I can't remember exactly what it was, but play happened. Then they get the call from New York. Hey, we're going to look for that again, or we're going to look at that again. So just hold on a minute. Given how it was on the TV, is that not a situation where the NFL can say, hey, this was clearly a false start? This really goes back to the conversation that I've had before, that I do think everything in the NFL should be open to review. Whatever play you want in the coach's challenge, it's their challenge. Let them do with it what they want. I think open it up. If they want to challenge or a delay of game, if they want to challenge a false start, if they want to check everything, let them do it. It's their challenge. But then, as a result of that, if you are opening up the challenge to everything, then you are opening up the expedited challenge to everything as well. And this situation would have been perfect because, again, it's not in the 1 o'clock window. It's not as if the officials or whatever are distracted by anything else. This is a big prime time Monday night game. Whoever it is in New York that's watching, Roger Goodell in his basement eating his M&Ms as he talks about how he does it. Anyone and everyone can see what happened. So just buzz down and say, hey, they false started. Bring the play back. I do think that is something that, again, is going to be addressed severely in the off season. One, the officiating of it, and then also, again, the expedited replay. I think it is going to be brought back, or not brought back, but brought back to the table, and then everything is going to be open for interpretation. Everything is going to be controlled by the all-seeing eye in New York, and this was a perfect example of it. It's not a play. It wasn't. It's not a play of importance. It's not something that can. A lot happened, so you've got to go back and what yard line were we on? Exactly what yard line it was on. Is 1 yard back from where you were because it doesn't gain that many yards. And what time is it? You can very easily just go back and alter it. So I do think that Albert Breer does raise a point. Something like that so egregious needs to be stopped, and that is where I think expedited replay is going to be given the chance to go back and look at it. Now, what the Philadelphia Eagles are going to do to try and counteract it, we see how teams try and get away with, if they think there was a controversial thing, they will hurry up and do the next play so that they, because you can't enforce a replay after the ball's been snapped and all that stuff. So maybe they'll run 2 tush pushes in a row, whatever. I don't know, so they can get the first one out the way and then make a quick snap on them. I don't know. You get what I'm saying. I think the Eagles will always try and find a way around it, as is their right, in a way, because, again, they have stumbled upon this brilliant idea, but given the added emphasis that has been going on within media landscape about how you can't enforce it, or you struggle to enforce the rules properly, I think it is going to be another big point of emphasis over the course of the off season, and it'll be very interesting to see which way it is going to go. Let me know how you think that's going to go. Leave a comment down below. Do you think that we have seen the end of the tush push? Is this going to be the straw that broke the camel's back when it came to the tush push? Again, they can't do anything about it now in season, but when the rules competition committee comes together in the off season, do you think that they are going to come hell or high water, make that change and get rid of it once and for all. Right, and with that, we move on to our league roundup for the weekend. Just some of the big stories, not every single game, because I don't have the time or attention span to get to every single game. But I do want to start off with the Eagles Packers game. And do you think that was a good game or not? That was some discussion that I saw on social media during it and afterwards, because it came, the start of the week and the end of the week all started the same way with a 10-7 score. Obviously, we had the Thursday night football game of the Broncos and the Raiders that ended 10-7, but then you had the Eagles and the Packers ending 10-7 as well. And are you happy with scores like that? I know that everyone says that offense drives the TV ratings, and that's what why they want to protect the quarterbacks because they're special and they produce the offense and that produced all that sort of stuff. But I did quite enjoy that game as a bit of a slog. I think it's somewhat different when it's two good teams going at it than it is two bad teams, because at least with the game on Monday night, you saw good defense, you saw good plays. It wasn't sloppy as it was on some occasion on Thursday night between the Raiders and the Broncos. So I don't know. Did you think it was good? I do enjoy these low scoring games. I can see the appeal of some of them, but I can understand why some people may say that it was pretty boring. Although I would say I did see some people who said the game was boring, and they point out the irony that this was one of the games that, as I addressed last week, the YouTube TV, the fact that everyone's fighting for, oh, this game needs to be back on YouTube TV. This is a brilliant game. Why aren't we allowed to, why aren't we allowed to watch this? Be brilliant. And then some people arguing that, was this really fighting all that fuss over because it was a bit of a nothing game? So I will say that. Although I will also say on the ending of it, I do just want to question both coaches with their handling of the situation. The Eagles for not going for a field goal right at the end when to put themselves up by 6 and making the Packers have to go and score a touchdown. At least I think they should have gone for a field goal rather than it wasn't a Hail Mary, but rather than try to make a play to run the clock down. I think a field goal would have been better, at least an attempt would have been better in that situation, because if it comes out, again, you've got to make them go all the way down the field to win rather than 25 yards to go and get a tie, and then maybe you lose in overtime. And for the Packers, again, their handling right at the end of the game was somewhat confusing with the go for the field goal. Okay, now we'll run a quick play, which I don't think you had. You had the chance to work out anyway. Then come out and bring the field goal kicker back on, and he shanks it horribly. I just think that for both sides there were questionable calls on how to end that game. But I mean that kind of added to the entertainment of it. But even if it wasn't done in the smartest of ways. Moving back one game, we go to the Sunday night game and some struggles from Pittsburgh Steelers quarterback Aaron Rodgers. And I don't want to, jump on and say that, no, this is the end. This is why we should have brought him back. But I do think there were some signs of, okay, are we perhaps getting to the end of the Aaron Rodgers era, shall we say? Just some of the decisions, some of the throws just made me think, okay, has age finally caught up to him? So Mike Tomlin's gone and given him his full support. He thinks he's fine. He sees the struggles, but overall he's not concerned. But honestly, I'm again not putting the death knell on Aaron Rodgers, but if that is what it's going to be moving forward, then I think there is some cause for concern within the Pittsburgh Steelers of, is he going to be the man that's going to get us through, especially when, it comes to the end of the season. We've got to play the Baltimore Ravens twice. We've got to play some very tough teams further along the line. Is he really going to be the man to push us to the playoffs, especially given how tight that AFC North division is, and when push comes to shove, is he going to be the man to be able to take us over the top? So I can see some concerns coming in there. The Buffalo Bills and their loss to the Miami Dolphins. Again, I'm not too concerned about that, because whenever you look at any Super Bowl team, there's always that one result that just doesn't quite make sense in the grand scheme of things. Like the New England Patriots would always go down and lose to the Dolphins at some point. whether it was a weather factor. They've been practicing in the cold up in New England for so long, then they go down in December and they've got to reacclimatize to the heat, and maybe they're struggling a bit because they've been so used to the cold. Or the Kansas City Chiefs have lost to the bad Raiders teams in the past. So I'm not too concerned about the Bills. I think everybody gets one bad performance and bad results against struggling teams. So I wouldn't be too concerned about that right now. I know they did lose to the Falcons a couple of weeks as well, but I don't know, Falcons somewhat more competitive and slightly better run than the Dolphins. So that's why I'm sort of putting this in a separate category. And the Baltimore Ravens on the charge as well. I think that needs to be noted. Their win over Minnesota. Minnesota, a very good team. And now the fact that the Ravens are starting to get their injured players back just about at the right time as we get into late November and into December and everything. That is going to be pretty crucial. And once a team like the Baltimore Ravens start to get on a run, you do wonder who's going to be in a position to stop them. Just a quick look at their schedule now: Browns, Jets, Bengals, Patriots, Packers, Steelers. That run towards the end of the season, if they pick up steam with wins against the Browns and the Jets and the Bengals, then that is a bit of a roll that may never stop. Speaking of the Bengals, news about Joe Burrow coming back. I know this isn't a result, but again, just a headline that it's hard to ignore. Joe Burrow back to training. Whether or not there's going to be any need for it, we don't know. But he's back in the practice facility in a limited fashion. But if the Bengals can somehow keep themselves competitive, I do wonder if the Bengals are going to push that trigger and say, "Hey, we're going to bring Joe Burrow back." I think it would be a very, very risky move. I think he should be shut down until the end of the season. So in a way, if I was a Bengals fan, I'd be comfortably prepared to write this season off and just, hope we get one or two more losses. Just don't push the issue with Joe Burrow. We've seen he's injury prone. Everyone knows this right now. Do you really want to put him in harm's way one more time unless you were guaranteed to make the playoffs and make a playoff run? I don't think I'd be very comfortable with that. So just another thing to just keep in mind. As we progress through the season, just keep track on Joe Burrow. How good is he? What are the Bengals' results? Is there really a chance for us to make the playoffs? And then make a decision. I don't think they should be rushing it back in any way, shape, or form. And finally, before we go, one very, very weird story from away from the world of the NFL, and this one's from the world of soccer, and I need to give some premise for this. Whenever we have our March Madness style tournament where it's a bracket and someone plays on a knockout tournament, I know it's had a lot of prominence brought up with shows like Ted Lasso mentioning it, so the FA Cup and the concept of it gets a little bit more attention. But whenever the selections are announced, it's not like March Madness where everything's decided right at the start, and then you just go from there. Is whenever we have our cup competitions, it's always drawn at random before each round. It's not reseeded. It's always redrawn at the end of each round, and whoever makes it through goes into the hat. And then the balls they're done by numbers. It's not, well, in the Champions League it is, but in FA Cups it's done by numbers, and every team is assigned a number. So it's number 1 versus number 17 or whatever. The FAW, the Football Association of Wales, decided to take things a little bit different this week in order to add some fun. Rather than just assign the teams numbers by alphabetical order or by, what is the prominent way, by the game number or the order in which they were drawn out in the previous round. So the first game that's drawn out, again, number 3 will play number 6. And then whoever wins that will be ball 1 in the next round because that was the first game drawn out. You follow my drift. But rather than do that, they decided to hold a go-kart race where each team was represented by a go-kart, and then whatever order they finished was then going to be the ball number when they made the draw. So it was the New Saints, Llandudno, Barrytown, and Cambrian United And they finished in that order, first, second, third, fourth. So then when the ball number goes through, TNS, the new Saints are going to be ball number 1, Llandudno were going to be number 2, Barrytown number 3, and Cambrian number 4. I just think that was a very weird and interesting quick. It certainly brought attention to the competition. I will give them that much. So I think a brilliant decision and just a very kooky decision. Now, again, just put this in perspective. The equivalent would be when it comes to March Madness, you have the 4 number 1 seeds. For the sake of argument, Kansas, Duke, Villanova, and Gonzaga. Just I know they're 4 really good basketball teams. And rather than being decided, through whatever equation the committee decides to put them in, they decide where they're going to be, north, south, east, west part of the bracket, and it's decided by a go-kart race. And then just put up that rate rather than being assigned that. I think it's just fascinating that they decide to do that. And again, just a brilliant novel idea to change things. Whether or not they do something similar in the future, we'll have to wait and see. And speaking of the future, we will have to wait and see what the NFL brings us next week, because that is the end of this week's show. I want to thank you very much for listening. Don't forget, if you are new, then like, subscribe on our YouTube, hit that bell icon to get notifications for when we publish. It's usually every Wednesday, but it can be at various times just because I've got to focus around my coming up on 6-month-old son, so that's got to factor into it. But it'll always be on a Wednesday, just we don't know what time. But make sure to hit that bell icon so you know when we publish. And don't forget to follow us on our other social medias. We are at Borden Sports Media on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok, and we are at MRB Sports Media on Twitter. And if you are a returning listener, then as always, thank you very much for making us a part of your week. That is it for this show. We will be back next week, where hopefully we'll have plenty more to talk about, and hopefully I won't have to spend some time talking about one controversial player. Hopefully I can talk about something, a little bit more bigger and a little bit more important, but we'll have to see whether or not the NFL provides us with that. So until next week, take care, and as always, stay safe.